This episode was made possible thanks to generous supporters on Patreon. Good day, everybody, and welcome to my YouTube series dedicated to your questions and my answers. It seems that this format is becoming more and more interesting to all of you, and this time I've got more questions to answer. And of course, I will start with the questions from my Patreon supporters, so let's go. Here is my formal Asking Alexandra question for the month of March. Can you please talk about how you composed the theme Leitmotiv for the album Aspects and how you blended it so beautifully in throughout the whole CD? This is a very interesting question, actually, and for this album, and especially for this Leitmotiv, I used a different approach that I usually do, because most of the time a melody pops up in my mind and it comes together with chords and some textures and things like that. But this time I started with just a chord progression, and it's probably the most cheesy chord progression that you've ever heard. And this is the following thing. I am sure that you can recognize probably at least 20 pop and rock hits all the way from the 80s up till today. And I guess this is what gives this album and this Leitmotiv specifically this very interesting popish flavor, although it's progressive metal. Anyway, so I started with this progression. But I wanted to do something that's a little bit more interesting, not so square the way it's used in pop music. So I decided to keep the bass note here. And in such a way I put additional tension of this chord, because this is too soft for my needs, but now it has more tension. And after that, instead of this, I decided to go with this, which also gives tension, because this is basically the relative major tonic, and it's stable, happy, but I don't need this happiness for this song. So I needed to do something, and I added tension by changing the bass note. And then the last chord would be too predictable to be like that. And of course I wanted a little bit of this I wanted this to be predictable just to a certain degree, not too much, because I am not making pop music in the end. So this is why instead of this, I changed the chord to this, which is basically this chord but with changed bass note. So the whole progression goes like that. And now it sounds a little bit more like Asia, and it's one of my favorite bands. And of course, if I keep repeating this thing over and over again, I go to the pop section again. So this is why I needed to do something more in the second repetition. So it was like that. And then instead of these chords, I made this, which is exactly the same trick that I did with the first repetition. Basically, this is this chord, but with changed bass note. And then, of course, instead of this, I changed again the bass note. Now it has a little bit more of this new classical vibe. And again the last chord in its dark version instead of the cheesy one. So the whole progression became like that. And now it sounds a little bit more interesting with more tension than it would be if all the chords were just clean, square, without nothing interesting in them. And on the top of that I needed to find some interesting theme which to be still catchy enough but not too simple, because again I'm not doing pop music. So I started just arpeggiating these chords. This is embarrassing. Sorry, I haven't played this since I recorded the album. And on the top of that, I started noodling something until the melody, until the melody appeared. And I actually intentionally put this note here because it adds interesting flavor to this chord, even more than originally with just this. So it becomes and now with this note again I'm making interesting chords, adding just a little bit of happiness to the otherwise dark chord. And so where we were, and now of course I needed development of this theme, because I can't just repeat this forever. Of course I can, but in other situations. So which sounds like something that I probably stole from somewhere, but I don't know from where. Probably from a movie soundtrack or something. So, and the chords below. And this was interesting approach. It was just playing two arpeggios on intervals. And of course again adding these interesting notes. And then the whole theme starts over again with some variations. And then I needed something different. Again. And then finishing the theme, I wanted something like a small cadenza, because otherwise it should be sliced just here and it just doesn't sound finished enough. So this is what I did. And this so predictable major before we go again into the darkness.
And in the darkness bind them.
Regarding the whole album, the thing that I actually wrote first was something completely different. It was this progression. Which is something that is heavily inspired by Beethoven. And basically, this is another leitmotiv that goes through the whole album, and you can hear it in many songs in this album. So basically, these two things are the whole construction of the album, and I put everything else around it. And since I've explained in the previous episode how actually I approach concept albums, and since Aspects is a concept album, I first wrote several of these main components and I just placed them in strategic places through the whole album, and then I started writing all the tracks around these pivotal moments. And every time when I needed to do a reprise of this theme, for example, I usually kept just this part in the beginning, and then I developed it in a slightly different way. So basically, this is the approach that I use for this album. It's been said that a work of art is never finished, you just stop working on it. So I guess my question is how you, as a perfectionist, resist the temptation to keep working on a track forever and never finish anything. This is also a very interesting question because it hits me right in the weak spot. Because I really struggle with this problem and I'm really a perfectionist. And even with my last album, since there were some delays which happened because of factors beyond my control, but I used the time to actually remix the whole album because I got new studio monitors, and then I heard a lot of things that I didn't like in the mix. So I needed to do an entirely new mix for the whole album, and I did it until I waited some other things to get sorted out. And it's very hard for me to find this spot. Usually it's the crossing point between two things. The first one is the moment when I start hating this song. I just stop enjoying it and the curve goes down and I started hating it at a certain point. And also there is another mental process that happens inside me, and it could be described with a quote that I liked really much, and in the past I thought it's by Michelangelo because this is what somebody told me, but it turned out that it's by Leon Battista Alberti, who is Italian architect, pretty much the same era. Beauty, the adjustment of all parts proportionately so that one cannot add or subtract or change without impairing the harmony of the whole. So I always look for the harmony of the whole when I'm doing music, and it's not just guitar and the background, but the guitar or the piano or the instrument that is soloing, it's integrated into the whole picture. And there is this moment of bliss when you suddenly see it and say, okay, that's it. And I needed to learn how to recognize this moment and keep it and use it as a sign that I need to stop improving this track no matter what. And this combined with this particular moment when I stop enjoying the track and I'm on the verge of start hating it. Basically, these are the pivotal moments that I look for every time when I'm about to finish a song. And so far, I think it's working. If you were putting together a 6-piece band of all-star musicians, who would the other 5 members be and why? I've been asked this question quite a lot. And during different moments of my life, I answer differently. So I suppose that the way that I will answer this question right now won't be the same thing that I will think somewhere in the future. But my current choice would be Mike Portnoy for the drums, because I like his style very much. And he's been one of my favorite drummers anyway, so yeah, I think this will be the choice for a drummer. Regarding a bass player, probably Steve DiGiorgio, because besides being excellent bass player, he's also predominantly metal-oriented player, but not only metal, he's very versatile, and his manner of playing and sound are things that I think would fit very well with what I do. Regarding the keyboards, I think it will be either Kevin Moore or Rick Wakeman, because of course they are members of 2 of my favorite bands, and I've been inspired a lot by them both when I'm doing keyboard parts for my music, so it's logical to want to play with them within the same dream band. Now a 6-piece band would require either having 2 more guitar players if I would be making instrumental music, or another guitar player and a vocalist if I will be doing music with vocals. And for sure I would love to have Mike Keneally by my side, because he's just a spectacular musician and so interesting and versatile player and composer that it will be just a blessing to be able to play with such a person. And regarding the vocals, I really love female voices in general, female metal singers. And nowadays there are a lot of awesome female singers in the metal scene. Currently, I'm really inspired by Maya Shining from Forever Still, and I'm lucky to have her as a friend, and she's a great person, and live she performs just brilliantly. And I think that her voice will suit my music very well. So yeah, basically these are my current choices. What setups you use when you record a track, like computer programs, hardware, amps? I actually have a very minimalistic setup. It's been changing through the years, but basically I've always had very few pieces of gear at my disposal, and I try to make the most out of them. And for example, in my first album, 9 Stories, this is something that many people still refuse to believe, but I actually recorded this album just with Boss GT8 and nothing else. It was plugged directly into the sound device, which was TC Electronic Desktop Connect 6. Very nice sound device. And yeah, just I plugged this Boss processor right into the DC electronic, and then it went into the laptop. And I'm using Logic Pro X, and this is what I used for my whole albums. For the second album, I bought a tube preamp by Angle. It was E530, very nice unit, and it sounded very well. Unfortunately, I had to sell it last year, but at least I managed to record 2 albums with that. And I recorded aspects with this device, and then I bought 2 Notes Torpedo Live, which also I had to sell. And these 2 devices were what I used for my last album, Opus 1880. And they were just again going right into my current sound device, which is Focusrite Scarlett L18i8. And I bought this sound device when I was about to record my second album, Aspects, and since then I work with this sound device. And everything else is pretty much plugins. I don't have amps and things like that. And regarding the keyboards, I'm using MIDI keyboards. Currently what I'm using is M-Audio Oxygen 88, and my previous keyboard, which I used for 9 Stories and for Aspects, it was again full-size keyboard by M-Audio. It was Keystation Pro 88, and yeah, it got broken, so I needed to get a new one. So with other bands that I work, I used Bias FX. For example, the albums that I made with Sevi, the Bulgarian band. If you haven't heard them, I will post links in the description. I don't know what part of these guitars remained with this sound, or they've been reamped after that, but this is what I basically used till now. And currently I'm recording another album that will be released very soon. It's the album Odd Times by Alberto Rigoni, and also Marco Mineman on drums, and it's instrumental prog. And I used Neural DSP for this album, the Pliny plugin, which sounds great, and you will have the chance to hear it very soon. Besides that, for my own stuff, I use a lot of libraries that I bought through the years, and it's Steven Slade drums, some libraries by Spitfire, 8Dio, and some other small things that there are too many to mention. And also I use a lot the built-in synth into Logic, which is Alchemy, and it's very versatile and nice software to have. Basically, this is what I use. So, yeah. Oh yes, a question. When it comes to composing or just keeping a musical idea, how do you stay focused on this? Oftentimes when I come up with an idea and I want to break it down on guitar, I quickly get carried away by starting to improvise around it, to even improve it maybe. And at the end, I often forgot the initial idea. When trying to write it down immediately, it takes me too long to notate everything properly, and I also end up having nothing completed. Do you record your idea and write it down afterwards? Some ideas are too hard to play it immediately. When I compose ideas and basically all kinds of music, I used to record everything, but at certain point I figured out that sometimes I didn't have the chance to record an idea on or just write it down on a paper, and it's been a very, very nice idea, and I was really hoping that I will remember it. And as a matter of fact, it turned out to be a very, very nice idea, and I remember it on the next day, and on the next day, and on the next day. And gradually I came to the conclusion that if I'm afraid that I will forget a certain idea and I write it down and I hear it on the next day, it's not so good. And in such way I just stopped recording any ideas, and I knew that if the idea is good, I will remember it. Regarding your question about noodling around the team, here's a very, very nice trick that I learned from one of my teachers, and it was regarding improvisation. So he said that basically the improvisation should be just ornamenting around the main theme and doing variations and making them more and more complex, and you put reprises of this theme here and there, and at the end you eventually return to the main idea. And this is something that I got used to do when playing jazz standards. And for example, a melody that's quite popular. And if you start improvising over this melody, you can just start with putting small things here and there, or just jumping an octave or other interval or something like that, but go back quickly, at least in the beginning, go back quickly to the theme and do something like or something like that, and you gradually put more and more ornaments, but occasionally you go back to the main idea. And this is the trick that I used basically when I start to noodle around, to keep the theme inside my mind and go back to it every once in a while. So this is how I don't lose myself. And another thing that is very important, that to be able to translate ideas immediately without losing it, you need very good oral skills, and also to know your instrument very well, and to be very prepared in terms of playing technique, because if the technique is limiting you, you will always lose your ideas. I mean, this is just how things are. Probably many people aren't happy because of that, because they prefer to keep it simple and things like that, and not to play complex stuff because they want everything to be from the soul and so forth. But basically these problems occurs every time. If you don't know your instrument and you don't have a good technique, you will always lose good ideas until you try to find them on the neck. So this is one thing which is very important. What are your favorite movie soundtracks? Greetings from Argentina. Greetings from Czech Republic. I think that the first soundtrack that got stuck in my mind was The Last of Mohicans, and it was this theme. And probably since then I started paying attention to soundtracks in general, and other soundtracks that I really like are The Last Samurai, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, of course, Schindler's List, Pirates of Caribbean, of course.
Well, duh.
These are the soundtracks that I always listen with great joy. So that was everything for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. And if you want to have your questions answered by me, write them down in the comment section. And also consider supporting me on Patreon up here and on the links again down in the description. Also, click like, subscribe to my channel, click the bell button to get informed when I upload new video. See you next time, stay safe, and please don't buy all the toilet paper.